Good evening. I'm Andy Andrews, and we are live here in Orange Beach, Alabama from Wisdom Harbor Studios at the Wharf, home of the Marlin statues and the incredible life-sized escalator statues. They're beautiful here. You should stand on them, take your picture on them. They look just like real escalators, but they're statues. I am here tonight for Page and Palette, and these are just my favorites. You know, the people at Page and Palette Bookstore in Fairhope, Alabama, have been my favorites for a long time, and so that is why we are on the air tonight. We are here with and for Page and Palette, and we're going to talk a little bit. I might read a little bit if you want me to from the new book, and I want to just have a good time with you. We'll answer some questions. Hi, Patricia Clapp from North Carolina, Annette, and I see you saw a post we made on Facebook earlier. Marcy Crossler, how are you doing? Joyce Cooper Ross from New Jersey. Marty White from Orange Beach. Hey, good. And Dolores Thomas from South Bend, Indiana. You know, South Bend was my nemesis for a long time because I'm an Alabama fan. And in the 8th grade, my daddy gave me tickets to the Sugar Bowl. It's 1973. Alabama was number 1. Notre Dame was number 2. And we sat in Tulane Stadium. It was the last Sugar Bowl ever held in Tulane Stadium. It rained, and Notre Dame beat us 24-23, and I cried. How about that? Herschel Craig, hello from San Antonio. Margaret Davis helped. And you have the book. Good. But you haven't read it. Well, all right. Yeah, I think you'll like it, though. I think you'll like it. And Zig watching in Mobile. That's Jim Ziegler. Kelly, hi. How are you? Debbie, do I have a podcast? Yes, I do have a podcast. It's every week, and it's called The Professional Noticer. And you can go on andyandrews.com and just put your email address in andyandrews.com, and you will get The Professional Noticer in your inbox. Or you can go on iTunes, Spotify. We do it by video as well, and so you can actually subscribe on YouTube and watch it. So this week our guest was Joe Bonsall from the Oak Ridge Boys. Next week, we have Gulf Coast Nation, shark fishermen from the beach. So it's going to be a great show. But join us, The Professional Noticer. It's every week. Becky Hornbuckle watching from where? Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Wow. Nancy. Hi, Nancy. Now, tonight, we're going to be talking about, again, we'll talk about my favorite bookstore. They are loaded up with the new book. The new book is Just Jones. Sometimes a thing is impossible until somebody actually does it. And I actually think, now it's just me, but I think it's the best writing that I have done. And it is the third. The Noticer came out several years ago. That was a Good Morning America book. And the Noticer was set in Gulf Shores and Orange Beach. Then the Noticer Returns, which was set in Fairhope. And Page and Palette Bookstore is actually in this book. That's where I find Jones again. And so that one in now. Just Jones. Each of the books are written in a way that you don't have to, you don't really have to read them in order because they kind of catch you up and the context is fine. And so if you want to read the new book first, be my guest. Again, I think you're going to like it. The new book is very funny. It's a mystery. It'll make you tear up a couple of times, maybe, and it'll make you laugh a lot, though. But Jones has a lot of wisdom in this book. The old man, people ask about him, and he, this is the explanation. But we tell the story in all of them. he, found me after my parents died. My parents died when I was 19, and I ended up living on the beach and sleeping under the pier down here in Gulf Shores. And he found me one night. An old man, never knew really how old he was. We didn't know what that suitcase was he was carrying, and didn't know what was in it. Never let us touch it. Always wearing the same clothes. Never knew where he went when he left. Never knew where he stayed when he was here. And we always called him Jones, not Mr. Jones, just Jones. And he's the first guy to ever tell me the truth about myself. And when I say that, people say, well, what does that mean? Well, when you meet somebody having a tough time, what do? We give them, we give them $5, or we put them on the prayer list at church, but very rarely do we sit down with somebody and tell them things about themselves that might make them angry at us. And that's kind of what he did. People say, really? So he made you angry? Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. But, where am I going? I'm sleeping under a pier. He got me started reading, and that really kind of started me writing. It took a few years to start me writing, but that was the start. I think writers are readers. I think that to be a good writer, I think you better read a lot. I think that you begin to notice some of the things that you enjoy when you're writing. Deborah Stewart says, so glad to join in, but looking forward to future in-person sessions. Yeah, me too. Me too. Kiefer too. Karen too. Everybody at Page and Palette too. But at least this way, I ain't got to wear a mask. You ain't got to wear a mask. So we're talking to each other. I heard what you said. You're hearing what I'm saying. And so it works, right? It's just a little adjustment. We don't really know for how long, but, one of the things we know about life is things change. And just when you think you got it figured out, here we go again. That's one of the things that Jones said to me that resonated really through the years in such a huge way. And it's on this Jones coffee cup. It's be careful. You can't believe everything you think. And then on the other side of the coffee cup, it is another one of Jones' quotes, which is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him think. So Christine Medley Hartley says, sounds like this set would make a great Christmas gift. I agree it would. Page and Palette has them all. And so, in fact, Kiefer and Karen came over here to the studio the other day, and I signed, I think it was was it 1 million, Matt? That's exactly right. It was 1 million. We counted 1 million books that I signed. Lou Ann Wright, thank you. I appreciate it. She says she loves the book, and it's all about perspective. You're right. That thing, perspective, ends up being something that I write about in almost every book because I'm still exploring it. It's something that Jones talked about a lot. Jones said perspective was more important than answers. He said, sometimes right in the middle of a crisis, there's just not an answer, right? Answers are a matter of timing. And he said sometimes there's not an answer you can just pick up and plug in. And he said, now, sometimes people think there is, and so they'll grab that square answer off the floor and try to shove it in that round hole, and you'll get something, but it won't be that perfect fit. It won't be that timing. It won't be the best. And so he says timing is something that has to be special. It's hard to gauge it, to sight it, to see it coming down the road, and that's why perspective is so important, because perspective brings calm into your life. If you have perspective about a situation, you are calm, and calm leads to clear thinking. Clear thinking yields ideas, and from ideas, we get, the timing appears. That ideas, we get answers. And don't think there's no ideas. Okay, in your worst time, Jones told me this one time, and I have always remembered this. He said, "Look, your worst time, it's not that big a deal." And I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, your worst time, everybody has one. If you look at every life from birth to death, everybody has a worst time. You could find it. There it is." And he said that the craziest thing about worst times is they always end. Everybody has one. We're all either in a crisis, coming out of a crisis, or headed for a crisis. It's part of being with us on this planet. And yet, the idea of a worst time is also a matter of perspective. And when you think about perspective, which that's the key, right? I mean, that's a key that Jones continues to talk about and continues to just like jam into my head. But when you think about perspective, most people, if you ask them, well, what is perspective? I think most people would say, well, perspective is how a person sees something, right? Just how they see something. Do they see the glass half empty or do they see it half full? How they see it is their perspective. And that is a great example of something that is true, but not the truth. Now, I won't get into that right now, that explanation about how things can be true and not the truth and the danger of stopping at what is true. That's in another book I have called The Bottom of the Pool. Okay, Page and Palette has those two. But the idea that perspective is how you see something that's true. It's just not the truth. Because in reality, the truth about perspective is it's not just how you see something, it's how you choose to see it. Right? Because the glass being half full or half empty, I mean, the glass is what it is. Right? I mean, that's it's a cliche, but cliches are cliches because generally they're pretty accurate. And so the level of liquid in the glass, it is what it is. And so it's how you choose to see it that puts you on one road or the other. We know what happens to people, the trajectory of the lives of people who choose to see the glass half empty. People don't really want to be around half empty people. People don't, people who see the glass half empty, they don't get promoted as quickly. Sometimes they don't get hired. Nobody wants a glass half empty person in a leadership position. And so when people are not getting promoted and they're not getting the opportunities other people are getting, and they're not getting hired, I mean, when you think about it, what happens to that life? It's definitely a lower trajectory than a glass half full person, because the glass half full person, those are the kind of people we want around us. Those are the kind of people we want to follow. Those are the kind of people we want to listen to. Those are the kind of people that we want to promote, right? And so we look at the trajectory of their life because the opportunities they are getting, the people paying attention to them, people following them. And so remember, the glass, the level of liquid in the glass is what the level of liquid in the glass is. But your perspective on that is how you choose to see it. Denise says, have I ever discussed the fact that Jones was an angel? Was he? People ask a lot of times, they say, who was Jones? And, I always ask, I don't know. What do you think? Because I've heard answers that were all over the map. But I will tell you this. After the first book came out, we started getting letters and emails and texts and It's literally from all over the world. It hasn't stopped to this day. The Noticer books, the Jones books, are in 40 languages around the world, and so you would not believe how many times we have had people write and say, "I met him, I saw him, he bought me lunch, he talked to me in an airport." One lady told me not too long ago I was throwing a cast net, and I turned around and he was there and talked to me. Carmen Sales told us, says, "I believe Jones is an angel." I'm not disputing anything, okay? Because I'm kind of amazed too. I'll tell you something very curious, and then I'll read you a little bit in the new book if you want. But something very curious is when I wrote the first book, when I wrote The Noticer, as a writer, you're trying to think of a title as you go, or maybe you have a title in mind. And so this one, I had, that's what I wanted, because that's what Jones had told me. When I met him years ago, he said, "I'm a noticer." That when God was passing out talents, I didn't get the cool ones. I can't run fast, I can't sing great, but I notice little things that change people's lives. These little things help people to regroup, take a breath, pick up, and start over again. So he said, "I'm a noticer." So when I wrote the book, I said to the publisher, I want to call it The Noticer. And they met, and said, "No, you can't call it The Noticer." I was like, "Really?" They said, "No, you can't call it The Noticer." I'm like, "Okay, why can't I call it that?" And they said, "Because noticer is not a word." and I'm like, "Yeah, well, neither was Google a few years ago, and that seems to have worked out pretty well for those people." All the names in those Harry Potter books, those aren't real things either. Okay, she just made that up, and so I think that we can do this, and so I finally won the little tug of war. But the curious thing is that it never occurred to any of us that as the book hit and began to go around the world, you can't translate something that's not a word, right? There is no translation in French for noticer. And so in France, the book is called The Man Who Sees Things. So it is amazing. Jan Ritter says, "But notificated is?" No, that's not a word either. I made that up. Because, by the way, if you're watching on Facebook, you can share this to your Facebook account. Share this to your feed right now, and we'll go live right now on your Facebook. So there's the share button down there, and just press the notification button. Shannon asked, "What is the live show that I do sometimes in the middle of the day?" A couple of times a week here from Wisdom Harbor Studios, we do what is called the Blue Plate Special. And we don't know when we're going to do it, except that it'll be at 12:15 p.m., right during lunchtime. And we go live from right here. We change the pictures behind me, and there's something different going on, but a couple of days a week, we go live. And so we go live on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube all at the same time. And so you can catch it, or you can catch it later. It'll post. But if you want, go on our Facebook account and just click the notification button. Okay, and make sure you turn notifications on your phone, so that when we go live, you will be notified. And right now, if you're on the Page and Palette website, you need to click the notification button on Page and Palette's website. Okay, Make sure you turn on the notification things on your phone, because as much as Page and Palette does and as many people as they bring in, you definitely don't want to miss anything. And so you will be, if you press the notification button, you will be notified when they go live. But yeah, the Blue Plate Special, it's always at 12:15, and you can catch us. We tend to do a lot. It tends to be Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, 2 of those days. And so we have a great time with it. We have guests. We have, sometimes we just act crazy and answer questions. And we have a good time. Hey, do you mind if I read a little bit from Just Jones? Let me get my glasses here. You know what? It is amazing to me that here I am with Page and Palette, and I'm in a new studio. Our studio is at the Wharf in Orange Beach, Wisdom Harbor Studios. And when I built this studio, one of my real dreams, those of you who have already read Just Jones know where this table came from, all right? And this is the peace table right here. And one of my dreams as we built this glass around this table that Jones left in this place was to have Winston Groom as a guest on one of my shows. And Winston passed away the night of Hurricane Sally coming through here. Such a fine man and just a great hero of mine, but I'd always wanted to interview him at this table. So I'm just picking a couple of places in here. Hey, Johnny Hall from Durham, North Carolina. There's a place, this is toward the back of the book, there's a place where Jones is at the peace table with several people. They meet every morning and drinking coffee, and I'm picking up with what the old man is saying. I'll just read just a little bit here, and then I got another place I want to read you. But I'm picking up because I'm looking at the table, and I'm thinking, that is a very strange shape. Jones was speaking again, and I tried hard to pay attention. "That's just life," he said. "Along the way, there are times when everyone finds themselves in hot water. But you don't have to let hot water define you. Instead, make something of the experience. During times of hot water, be coffee." I glanced at the faces around the table and almost laughed out loud as the old man calmly took a sip from his cup. They were confused. Of course, I didn't know what he was talking about either, but I also knew he wasn't finished. "If you're in hot water, don't be a carrot. Hot water will change a carrot forever. Hot water makes carrots soft." Jones sips his coffee again. "You don't want to be like an egg either," he said. "An egg in hot water will turn hard inside, and later the egg will become cold." Reaching into the pocket of his jeans, the old man brought out a handful of his coffee beans and gently spread them across the table. Then he held up his cup as if giving a toast and said, "The next time you find yourself in hot water, be coffee. When coffee gets in hot water, instead of being ruined, coffee finds purpose. Coffee changes the water itself. Only in hot water does coffee realize its potential." So, the characters in this book are some of my favorite. I love the kid. There's a 13-year-old boy in here, and let me just read you kind of his introduction. But this kid is pranking the town. You know, I mean, there's an old woman that nobody likes. There is a young lady that has gotten into big trouble that Jones is helping. Jones owns a five and dime in this book. He owns Jones Five and Dime, and it's a very odd story. I have to read the book and find out. But the young lady works in the store, and so does the 13-year-old boy, Oliver Sutherland. He works in the store too, and just part-time after school. But here, let me read just kind of the introduction of Ollie Sutherland. I think you'll like this. It's one of the coolest characters to me that I've written. Here we go. Allow me to state for the record that of all the ages I would not want to do over again, 13 is at the top of the list. A 13-year-old human, at least the male of our species, is much like a lion of the same age equivalent and gender. Even his voice is uncontrollable. And sometimes at night, when he's alone in the dark, what he imagined as a roar squeaks from his throat, more a cry for his mother than a declaration about becoming king of any jungle. At 13, there is an unforeseen low tide of self-esteem that arrives with a rising level of uncertainty about the world in general. These demons of doubt produce irrational fear, a gradually occurring false narrative of terror that might have come to town unannounced, but is now steadily making its presence known. Viewed dispassionately, as one might watch a germ under a microscope, irrational fear can be understood as an invention of the mind, a self-seeking missile with load-bearing capacity that adjusts on the fly and will use however much weapons-grade material the mind has provided to completely destroy its target. Irrational fear is a creative misuse of one's own imagination, and while most often destructive, this type of fear is actually armed with a shutdown switch that can be flipped, held fast, and locked. It's a mental gear that can be triggered only by intentional thought and contains the power to banish trepidation forever. Unidentified and left alone, irrational fear often finds a grip and begins to squeeze the guts of a boy and lead him to another deception, this one about the opposite sex. The lie convinces him that the beast in his belly is a greater foe and far more difficult to vanquish than the harmless monarchs and swallowtails fluttering at the same time in delicate tummies of girls. Yes, life until now has been experienced from inside the safety of a carefully managed playground. But at 13, the boy hears and feels the gates to that sanctuary being unhinged. Seat belts fastened or not, all indications are that the ride from this point on will be faster and rougher and portioned out with a significant reduction in mercy. As the consciousness of a 13-year-old boy pegs deep into the red zone, the world he once thought to be wide and welcoming now feels cramped and unsteady, like an outhouse being nosed by machine onto a conveyor belt and shoved down society's fast-tapering throat. He finds himself struggling for space, and the adults who not too long before had circled him with protective arms aren't as friendly as they used to be. Neither are they as funny. But then, right about the time he has gathered the courage to speak up, perhaps to talk with someone about what he is noticing, a huge funnel suddenly appears directly ahead, and the boy knows without question that he had darn well better fit into the neck of it, just like the other kids seem to be managing. And of course he does. With a forced smile on his face and in nicer clothes than he would have ever chosen to wear, the boy is ground down the chute with very little say in the matter. For at this point, it is the fate of almost every 13-year-old to get dumped into one big doughy mess with the other kids roughly his same age, all wearing somewhat similar clothes and having mastered a predictably limited vocabulary. Once in, not long after the mixing blades begin their relentless work, he resigns himself to the inevitable and decides to ignore the pain, no longer attempting to surface and ride the top of the wave or swim to the edge of the bowl. The recipe was decided upon long ago. Blending is now underway, with the always interesting addition of assorted nuts and flakes tossed into the mixture along the way. The goal, of course, is to be properly rolled out, cut into shape, and baked through the industrial conveyor ovens of middle and high school in order to be inspected at the other end and labeled a perfect cookie. At that magnificent moment, society's hope, of course, is that he, along with all the others, might now take the opportunity to do it all over again, but this time for real money, at a state-sanctioned university to which he can remain in financial debt for the rest of his life. And during the rest of his life, if that man ever becomes confused by his lack of employment due to the level of difficulty he has encountered meeting people, or contributing to conversations deeper than those about television programs or ball games, if he is ever discouraged by the inability to communicate an idea effectively or understand the basic economic realities controlling his very existence, then at least he can be content knowing that if a government agency ever again requires him to read a novel by John Steinbeck or to explain why he failed to perform a simple bookkeeping task, he will at least be able to identify a theme like weariness or the American dream and claim that once upon a time he was indeed able to pass Algebra 2. Oliver Sutherland was 13 years old. I'd seen Oliver around Orange Beach for a couple of years. A lot of people come and go in a resort town, and after a time, there is a sameness to all of them. Oliver, however, was in an obvious category of one. It wasn't because Oliver was tall, even though he was, or because he was beanpole thin or sported freckles that evenly covered his arms and face. No, the detail that stood one to attention upon a first glimpse of Oliver was his hair. To simply say Oliver Sutherland was a redhead and let it go at that would do an injustice to your imagination. So how do I put this? Describing Oliver's hair as red would be like saying Goliath was kind of a big guy, or that Rembrandt was a pretty good painter. Only if flame produced pigment instead of heat could one possibly characterize the color of this young man's head. And to quell any suspicion that my portrayal is exaggerated, I'd ask you to remember Melanie Martin's reference to Ollie's head resembling a ball of fire. In addition, consider the fact that even while engaged in casual conversation, the townspeople of Orange Beach do not compare the color of Oliver's most recognizable feature to anything else. Instead, all things are compared to it. For instance, instead of wasting precious minutes browsing through the variations of red offered by the nail salon on Canal Road, a lady need only pop in and declare, "I need a bottle of polish the shade of the Sutherland child's hair," and a bottle would be fetched. So this is Ollie. Everybody loves him, you know. I mean, they love him, but here's a little more about Ollie. Let me read just a little more about Ollie. Oliver was extremely smart, though his grades at school did not bear evidence to the fact. Only into his teens, Oliver was a brilliant conversationalist, and when the opportunity presented itself, his quick wit was apparent. He smiled often and laughed easily. The only issue anyone seemed to have with Oliver was that there didn't seem to be any kind of an issue. Ever. Dr. Charlie Cooper spoke for most of Orange Beach when he said, "Great kid, great kid, but you can just look at Ollie and tell he's up to something." So Oliver had a reputation for mischief even though he'd never been caught at anything. Never been caught. Those three words explain why people around town were convinced that Oliver certainly got away with a lot. Curiously, however, since no one could produce a single example of anything he'd actually gotten away with, neither was anyone able to define a lot. Word had gotten around about a conversation held one morning at Café Beignet. Apparently, Pastor Rourke had made a remark about Blair Houston Monroe not liking Oliver, to which Mike Martin responded, "That don't mean nothing. Blair Houston don't like nobody. I'd hardly hold that against the child." The child. Well, there you have it. It's a perfect example of our earlier topic. You see, referring to Ollie as a child is a big part of the problem with that age, because at 13 he wasn't a child anymore. But neither was he an adult. Not all kid, not quite grown up. It's a juxtaposition that goes a long way at explaining the reasoning in that young teenaged way of not reasoning at all that made it possible for Oliver to have decided he was in no danger, even while his arm up to the shoulder was pushed through the intake vent of a currently functioning commercial air conditioning unit. I suppose many of us are fortunate to have survived some of the things that seemed perfectly logical to us as teenagers. The old enough to know better speech that is often given by a parent or sometimes another authority is an after-action declaration derived from sound adolescent sociology. Unfortunately, its power is most often used too late to prevent trouble, but is always just in time for a hearty "I told you so." Similar confusion can be found in comparisons of old enough and young enough. Opposite meanings, to be sure, but certainly another way of explaining the decision-making process Oliver engaged just prior to his present activity. Oliver was old enough to have quietly navigated several hundred yards of pine thicket, alone in the dark, and accurately arrive in a specifically predetermined location behind the middle school. At the same time, he was young enough to confidently stick his hand deep inside a working machine running 100,000 BTUs per hour and not think about electrocution as a possibility. There were 4 monstrous air conditioning units lined up at the back of the school. Oliver had plans for 3 of the 4: the gym and locker rooms, the school office complex, and the music wing, which included the glee club and the band room. Most of the actual classrooms would be spared. You gotta have some folks to laugh, he thought. Can't have everybody crying and throwing up. With his arm deep inside, Oliver did something that seemed to require force with his hand. He rocked forward a couple of times, heard a hiss, and backed his arm out. Moving to his right, he repeated the procedure twice more and was finished with what he had intended. Even though the vast majority of his product was vented into the school, Oliver was surprised to feel a smidge nauseous from the tiny whiffs he had received. Any hunter could have told the 13-year-old that most of the game animal mating scent urine-based products could melt someone's head from their shoulders. There was nothing that compared to the stench. Nothing. The deer lure doe in heat is rough. However, it is child's play compared to sow in heat, a can of which Oliver had in his hand at the moment. An aerosol can of sow in heat, purchased at Campbell's Hardware and Sporting Goods, cost less than $10 per can, and 3 were all he needed. When Oliver depressed the caps and the 3 cans emptied their contents into the vent system that powered the air conditioning for 3/4 of Orange Beach Middle School, he retreated, easing through the pines on a direct route home. Ollie was tired but happy. The soughing heat alone would have been enough. As it turned out, the foul hormonal mixture was only the cherry on top of his original idea. Anyway, Deb Just O'Brien says, love this book. Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed that. I don't know if you have any questions or not. I'm glad to be here tonight with Page and Palette. And you guys all over the country. Page and Palette is just my favorite bookstore. I mean, it's just, it's one of those kind of places I can just come in, ease in, and just, I like being there. You know, they got the coffee bar, and it is just an awesome place. So, are there any questions? Any questions? If there's not any questions, we'll sign away and sign off. I appreciate you guys so much. Appreciate you joining us for this tonight. And I want to thank Karen and Kiefer, and appreciate all you guys down there at Page and Palette. Margaret, I thank you. She said she enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And discount for a bulk order, of course. Everybody gets discount for bulk order, you know. So, but please keep up with me. I'm andyandrews.com, and we have we have the Just Jones Java. Okay, we got some of Jones coffee, man, on the website, and the cool coffee cups, and we've got a really pretty long sleeve T-shirt, you know, with the arrowhead up here and the tree in the back, and Deborah Stewart says, what's coming next? Lord, I don't know. I don't know. I'm, you know, just let me take a breath, Deborah. Okay. You know, we got the cameras are static in here, and so it's hard to back up and show the table, but we've got opportunities to do that. So just, you know, join us sometime and come down and visit. Don't forget to go by Page and Palette. Come see us here at the Wharf, home of the escalator statues. Unbelievable that anybody would spend that much money on. I mean, there are 4 major statues of escalators here, and but they're beautiful. We have the big stainless steel marlin statues, and then of course the escalator statues. Yes, I appreciate that. You should. Thanks for reading. When do I feel most inspired to write? I think that it's an early morning thing for me. It's an early morning thing. If I get up, get real quiet and get going, that's the best time for me. Tammy Crittenden says, I have to come see the Peace Table. I want you to. I don't know if you can see it. I know it's hard to see. The cameras are set, you know, but the arrowheads are running right here. There's the white one that was shot into there, and Joyce Cooper Ross. Come visit sometime. But for now, thank you guys so much. Appreciate, again, appreciate Page and Palette, appreciate their friendship and their support, and I certainly want to support them all I can. And, you know, I drop in there a lot, just say hi. So you need to do the same. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you soon.